Spirit of God, warm us. Warm us with the peace of your constant presence. Spirit of God, illuminate us. Illuminate us with the truth of who you are and who we are in you. Spirit of God, captivate us. Captivate us with the love that draws us closer and closer to you. Spirit of God, may we gather to worship you.
There's a sweet, sweet spirit in this place, and I know that it's the Spirit of the Lord. There are sweet expressions on each face, and I know they feel the presence of the Lord. Sweet Holy Spirit, sweet heavenly dove, stay right here with us, filling us with your love. And for these blessings, we lift our hearts in praise. Without a doubt, we'll know that we have been revived when we shall leave this place. Sweet Holy Spirit, sweet heavenly dove, stay right here with us, filling us with your love. And for these blessings, we lift our hearts in praise. Without a doubt, we'll know that we have been revived when we shall leave this place.
For the next month, we're going to be taking a look at the early story of Moses in the Hebrew Bible, particularly the story of Moses and the burning bush from Exodus 2 through 4. Each week, we'll be reading different excerpts from these chapters to give us a different lens and new things to focus on. So we begin today with these excerpts from the book of Exodus, chapters 2 through 4. Moses was taking care of the flock for his father-in-law Jethro, Midian's priest. He led his flock out to the edge of the desert, and he came to God's mountain called Horeb. The Lord's messenger appeared to him in a flame of fire in the middle of a bush. Moses saw that the bush was in flames, but it didn't burn up. When the Lord saw that he was coming to look, God called to him out of the bush, "Moses, Moses." Moses said, "I'm here." Then the Lord said, "I've clearly seen my people oppressed in Egypt. I've heard their cry of injustice because of their slave masters. I know about their pain. I'm sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt." But Moses said to God, "Who am I to go to Pharaoh and to bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" God said, "I'll be with you." But Moses said to God, "If I now come to the Israelites and say to them, 'The God of your ancestors has sent me to you,' they're going to ask me, 'What's this God's name?' What am I supposed to say to them?" God said to Moses, "I am who I am. So say to the Israelites, 'I am has sent me to you.'" Then Moses replied, "But what if they don't believe me or pay attention to me? They might say to me, 'The Lord didn't appear to you.'" The Lord said to him, "What's that in your hand?" Moses replied, "A shepherd's rod." The Lord said, "Throw it down on the ground." So Moses threw it on the ground, and it turned into a snake. Moses jumped back from it. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Reach out and grab the snake by the tail." So Moses reached out and grabbed it, and it turned back into a rod in his hand. "Do this so that they will believe." Again, the Lord said to Moses, "Put your hand inside your coat." So Moses put his hand inside his coat. When he took his hand out, his hand had a skin disease, flaky like snow. Then God said, "Put your hand back inside your coat." So Moses put his hand back inside his coat. When he took it back out again, the skin of his hand had returned to normal. If they won't believe you or pay attention to you the first sign, they may believe the second sign. If they won't believe even these two signs or pay attention to you, then take some water from the Nile River and pour it out on dry ground. The water that you take from the Nile will turn into blood on the dry ground. But Moses said to the Lord, "My Lord, I've never been able to speak well, not yesterday, not the day before, and certainly not now since you've been talking to your servant. I have a slow mouth and a thick tongue." Then the Lord said to him, "Who gives people the ability to speak? Who's responsible for making them unable to speak, or hard of hearing, sighted, or blind? Isn't it I, the Lord? Now go, I'll help you speak, and I'll teach you what you should say." But Moses said, "Please, my Lord, just send someone else." Then the Lord got angry at Moses and said, "What about your brother Aaron the Levite? I'll help both of you speak, and I'll teach both of you what to do." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Who am I? Who am I? That is perhaps one of the most fundamental questions of simply existing in this world. Perhaps the most fundamental question. It's something we begin to ask ourselves pretty early in our lives as we begin to grow up, and it's something we never really stop asking as we change and as life changes around us. Who am I? It's a question that leads us both to discovery and decision. Discovery, as we learn about our likes and dislikes, our gifts and talents, our personalities, our quirks, our rough edges. And decision, as we choose paths for ourselves, our work, our relationships, our clothing, our ways of treating others in this world. Who am I? And this is also a question that leads us to a number of other questions. Who am I allowed to be? Who am I supposed to be? Who am I wanting to be? Who am I afraid of being? Who am I keeping myself from being? Who am I? That is the question that animates our scripture passage today, the story of Moses and the burning bush, where Moses is called forth by God. This is a story rich with questions about identity. Now, to rewind a little bit from our reading today, Moses begins his life with a fractured identity. He's born an Israelite, born into a system where his very life was threatened by those in power, the Egyptians. But thankfully, women watched over him as an infant and hid him and protected his life until he was adopted into the royal family of the Pharaoh. This complicated identity eventually leads to Moses getting into a lot of trouble. And one day Moses starts to defend the Israelite people against the oppression of the Egyptians. And because of this, he's exiled away from his people. And this journey takes him to the edge of the desert, to the foot of a mountain. And it's there that he has an encounter with God. And this just isn't, any other encounter. It's a powerful and intimate encounter. It appears in this supernatural fire, but it's all about building a new relationship. First, God reveals God's own identity, this mysterious, enigmatic name, I am what I am, or I will be what I will be. And then God calls Moses into his own new identity. And God says, I'm sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. Moses responds with, who am I? Who am I to go to Pharaoh and to bring the Israelites out of Egypt? Who am I? And what begins to occur in this space is a conflict. It's a conflict between two selves, the person Moses thinks he is and the person that God is calling him to be, between a false self and a true self. And I imagine this as a gap, false self here, true self there. And in the middle of this gap, there's fear. And each time God tries to push Moses into his true self, Moses responds out of that fear. Fear of inadequacy. Who am I to do this? Fear of shame. They won't believe me, God. Fear of failure. I won't have the right words. And fear of rejection. They won't even pay attention to me. Two different selves, the power of fear pushing them apart. Last year, a Twitter post went viral in a lot of LGBTQ circles. Here's what it said. Queer people don't grow up as ourselves. We grow up playing a version of ourselves that sacrifices authenticity to minimize humiliation and prejudice. The massive task of our adult lives is to unpack which parts of ourselves are truly us and which parts we've created to protect us. Now, the reason this post went viral is because these words describe the lived experience of so many LGBTQ people, this splitting of the self that comes from the fear of the true self getting out. And like Moses, there exists this gap for many LGBTQ people, this gap between who the world wants me to be and who I truly am, or who God is calling me to be. And in the space between is yes, this fear, a lot of fear. For example, fear of society's expectations. I remember in middle school, I remember literally forcing myself to walk a certain way and carry myself a certain way so people wouldn't say I was different or make fun of me or any of the things that came with that. But for many, there are much deeper fears involved here. Fear of family reactions and disconnection and estrangement. Fear of exile from jobs, from churches, from schools and other communities. Fear of eternal punishment. And in some places in this world, still to this day, fear of imprisonment or even death. There are actually 70 countries around the world where existing as an LGBTQ person is illegal. For many folks, the true self can be elusive because it's clouded by shame, it's clouded by rejection. And for some LGBTQ folks, the true self isn't even an option because it's a threat to their lives. This gap, this tension is traumatic and harmful, and over 50% of LGBTQ people struggle with moderate to severe mental health issues every day. And so closing this gap and finding that authentic self becomes the work, this lifelong journey towards wholeness and to peace. But while this gap between the selves exists profoundly in the lives of LGBTQ folks, we all wrestle with finding our truest, fullest selves. We're all called into false identities and asked to wear masks in our lives. We might be asked to look a certain way, to talk a certain way, to take certain jobs, to meet certain expectations of us, to perform a role correctly, to fit in. And sometimes those identities match up with who we are. Sometimes they don't, and sometimes they're actually at odds with who God has called us to be. Thomas Merton, he was an American theologian and a poet. He's prolific, and he actually lived in a monastery in Kentucky from the 1940s to the 60s, and he puts it like this. Every one of us is shadowed by an illusory person, a false self. That is the man that I want myself to be, but who cannot exist because God does not know anything about him. My false and private self is the one who wants to exist outside the reach of God's will and God's love, outside of reality and outside of life. And such a life cannot help but be an illusion. The secret of my identity is hidden in the love and mercy of God. Therefore, I cannot hope to find myself anywhere except in him. Therefore, there is only one problem on which all my existence, my peace, and my happiness depend: to discover myself in discovering God. If I find him, I will find myself. And if I find my true self, I will find him. I love the way that Thomas Merton puts this, that God doesn't even know our false self, that God is only interested in helping us discover our truest selves. And when we live into who we are, we actually discover God in the process. Another contemporary theologian puts it like this. RuPaul, go with me here. RuPaul says, we all have an inner saboteur, this part of us that tries to sabotage us by making that fear that we have about ourselves really, really loud. On her show, RuPaul's Drag Race, which if you haven't seen it, you absolutely must. She works every week with drag performers to help them uncover all of the ways they are being held back by themselves when that voice gets really loud. And when that inner saboteur does get really loud for them, she reminds all of these queens, don't forget you're a star. And that's kind of how God responds to Moses too. When Moses says, who am I to go do this mission that you have for me? God says, I will be with you. Each time Moses doubts, God responds, stop listening to that voice. I am here with you. I am here with you. I am here with you. I'm here in your words. I'm here in your talents. I'm here in your body. I'm here in your community. God says, I am here. We're a team. I'm in you and you're in me. Moses' identity is wrapped up in the fact that who he is wrapped up with God. And this hinges on trust. Moses must trust that. God calls us into our true identities, and we must trust who we are called to be, even in our fear, even when the world tells us something different. And by living authentically, living fully and honestly and completely, we're then freed up to all that God has for us. We no longer have to waste time and waste energy and shame and worry, but we can live with peace and joy, knowing that we are living the life God has called us into. I want to introduce you all now to Brad Gardner. He is an amazing musician who has served as music director for a number of Broadway and touring shows, from Aladdin to Mean Girls. And we talked earlier this week about what it means to live authentically and where he experiences God in his own life. So here's a little bit of our conversation together. Brad, thank you so much for joining us today. We're so glad that you're here with us. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be a part of this.
I would love to start with just tell us about your art and how music speaks to you and why that's kind of your way of expressing yourself in the world.
I barely remember a time when music wasn't in my life. Growing up with music and my journey as a queer person, I think music back in those formative years growing up was this sanctuary and this space, this almost like therapeutic space where I could go play piano and be creative and express myself, maybe in a way that I couldn't express myself as a kid because I didn't know how to deal with what I was feeling. And so I think that's what really bonded me to music when I was growing up. It's something that I often have to remind myself of like when I'm feeling like burnout or something with whatever project I'm working on. If I go back and check in with, like 10-year-old, 15-year-old Brad, it totally puts the whole thing in perspective of like, oh no, this is really cool.
When you think music and spirituality, what does that mean to you?
It can be a way of expressing when I'm playing piano or conducting an orchestra. It can be really a means of expression that doesn't have to be verbal. And being able to tap into this nonverbal communication that transcends language, that transcends spoken language, I think is really beautiful. What does your spiritual background look like? I was raised in a Baptist church in the South. And part of that was I was in a private Baptist school from kindergarten through my senior year of high school. I signed contracts there that I couldn't dance, that I, couldn't touch anybody else, like hold hands. I couldn't go to the movies. It was a pretty strict, rigorous environment. Going through that as a queer person was really a struggle. And that was really why I stayed so connected to music, and music helped me a lot. But my beginning spiritual journey, honestly, was going through the emotions of a spirituality that was forced upon me. That was all I knew. So I was the door-to-door, John 3:16, like knock on the door person. But it was almost like in that environment, it was seen as like, oh, those are the good kids that did that. And so I was trying to fit into that. I climbed that ladder, became president of the Save to Serve Club, which was like a missionary hosting thing. But, it wasn't me, because I knew deep down, like I knew Brad was gay. And so I was the top of what I thought I should be. And I was so far from myself. And so when I got to college and really like got out of that environment, I ran so fast. I ran so fast from that and like really just said, nope, no church for me, no church for me. It's funny because it started to sneak back in and being like, wait, there's like, I can't deny that there's something to this. It was just maybe I came into it wrong. I came into it, not wrong, but I could find what spirituality meant for me. My spiritual journey has been journaling. It's been a lot of like having time with myself, sitting down and like disconnecting from the world and just writing. It's really eye-opening. And I often discover things that I write down and I'm like, wow, where did it come from?
Talking a little bit about our scripture passage today. So I sent you the story of Moses and the burning bush. And I'm just curious kind of what your reactions to this piece were. And anything that came up as you sat with this piece.
Yeah, I had never thought about Moses and the burning bush from a queer identity perspective. And now I don't think I'll ever unsee that. And I realize that's my own interpretation of it. And that's my own, that's because, I came out of the closet and that's such a huge part of my life. It's hard for me now to never see that passage as from a different perspective. I saw it this time as God calling Moses into a new identity, yes, but into an identity that was Moses. God calling us to be ourselves. I had never seen this passage as that until this time. It's like, hey, if you show up as you and you love yourself as who you are, then He can use us and we can be so much more connected to spirituality and connected to making beautiful things in this world and being part of this wonderful community. Even better if we just show up as ourselves. When I know I am making an effort to be my most connected and authentic self, that's when I actually feel like I feel the Spirit or feel connected more. And in those moments, I think there's more space to find that connection. Mm-hmm. There's more space to see it. Because it may have been there all along, but I just didn't have the brain space to even tap into it. One of the places that I often have felt this bigger spiritual connection, this bigger connection to something just beyond me, is in theater. And specifically, I look back at my time with Aladdin, because there's something that's so incredible, especially as a conductor, in you're being in a room with, say, 2,000 people, in that these 2,000 people have made this almost this silent pact. Okay, we're going to turn our phones off, hopefully, and we're all going to connect and unite over this piece of art for the next 2.5 hours. And as a musician, as a conductor, knowing that I get to be the one that starts that, it's cool. First of all, it's cool. It's like it's an incredible feeling. And then to know that those kids are just like lifted like onto cloud 9 because of that, or it's just this moment of like just leveling up the room that happens in that moment. That's really magical. So when you asked about like moment, like, probably 90% of the world knows the song is A Whole New World. It's not necessarily about God in that moment in the show, but like to me, it's such this connection to, wow, look at what music and look at what art can create. Here, like as a conductor, I remember you'd hear the people in the front few rows, like maybe singing along, or the carpet would take off and people would just like lose their breath. You would hear it. And just, it brought me chills just when I would know that was happening right there 8 times a week and I got to be a part of it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing your story, Brad, and thank you for reflecting on this, and thank you for your gift of music. We really appreciate it, and thank you just for your time.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. This has been really a special thing to reflect on this past week.
Here, let's listen to A Whole New World, performed by Brad. Friends, our true identities, our real selves, are bound up in nothing else but God and what God has for us. But that can be a challenge to uncover in a world with voices, including our own, that call us to be different versions of ourselves. And that's why it's important to take time to rest in God's presence. Now, in our story today, we're reminded that God's call to Moses comes not from a person, not from a booming voice, but from a fire. Now, typically, I think we might imagine this burning bush as this big, startling, blazing fire. But fires can also be a source of peace. If you've ever paused and stared at a campfire, there's something about it that's mesmerizing and hypnotizing. It's quieting and soothing. Perhaps this is the fire of God, a silence that we can find to listen to God and listen to ourselves. So now during this time, I invite you into this moment of prayer and meditation to be with God and invite God to help you discover yourself more fully and be drawn even closer to the warmth and love of God. Let us pray.
Spirit of the living God, fall afresh on me. Spirit of the living God, fall afresh on me.
Lord, you have examined me. You know me. You know when I sit down and when I stand up. Even from far away, you comprehend my plans. You study my traveling and resting.
You are thoroughly familiar with all my ways. There isn't a word on my tongue, Lord, that you don't already know completely. You surround me, front and back. You put your hand on me.
Spirit of the living God, fall afresh on me.
You are the one who created my innermost parts. You knit me together while I was still in my mother's womb. I give thanks to you that I was marvelously set apart. Your works are wonderful. I know that very well. My bones weren't hidden from you when I was being put together in a secret place, when I was being woven together in the deep parts of the earth.
Spirit of the living God, fall afresh on me.
Your eyes saw me before I was born. And on your scroll, every day was written that was being formed for me, before any one of them had yet happened. God, your plans are incomprehensible to me. Their total number is countless. If I tried to count them, they outnumber grains of sand. If I came to the very end, I'd still be with you.
Spirit of the living God, fall afresh on me. Spirit of the living God, fall afresh on me. Melt me, mold me, fill me, use me. Spirit of the living God, fall afresh on me. I, the Lord of sea and sky, I have heard my people cry. All who dwell in dark and sin, my hand will save. I who made the stars of night, I will make